All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining our Dion Leadership webinar series today. Our topic is Healthy Leaders Grounded and Conscious is the New Competitive Advantage. Joining us today is Steve Dion, founder and CEO of Dion Leadership, and Dr. Bob Rosen.
Thank you, Genevieve, and thank you, everybody, for taking time out of your busy schedule to join our program today. I'm super excited to have Dr. Bob Rosen on the show and talk a little bit about his life work. So welcome, Bob. Thanks for being here.
Pleasure.
So to set the stage for this, before I turn this over to Bob, Bob and I've got to know each other pretty well over the last bit of time here, and I'm just super excited to bring to you all some work about healthy leadership. As an organization that does leadership development, coaching, and consulting, we're always looking for practical and new ways to help leaders be more effective and present in organizations. And Bob will share his full story, but he is a fascinating career in studying what health looks like to leaders and organizations. And today, we're going to share with you some of the models of that work and talk about how you can bring these thoughts, ideas, and concepts into your organization. We will be having a pretty interactive webinar today. I ask you to use the chat, please, and we're going to have a couple of polls. But for those of you, as a quick introduction, that don't know Dion Leadership, we are a leadership development and organizational consulting firm. And why we like this work particularly is we're very passionate about helping organizations create situations where employees start every day excited and end every day accomplished. And what comes out of that and what's important with that is health and leadership. So we talk about it regularly. We write and think and speak in this space, as you can see about some of the awards that we have here on the screen. And I think this work and content really falls really well into that space. So I'll be interested to get your feedback on this as we go through this work today. So the work that we do and what we're going to talk about today really kind of falls within the leadership development, management development arenas, but also within team development and leadership coaching. So I think these models and this work can unpack across even organizational development solutions as well. So this really dovetails nicely within that work. I'm going to turn the stage over to Bob to talk a little bit about the model and the work, and he's going to share his slides. And know that some of the organizations that we do this type of work for are on the screen here. And so Bob's going to talk through this. I'm going to kind of monitor the chat. Throughout this, we can bring your questions in as well. And at the end, we'll save time to talk about how organizations like these apply this work and how you can bring health and grounded and conscious leadership to your organization. So Bob, you want to join your slides? You can drive with that. And again, I just want to invite people to participate in the chat today. Please, we're going to have a couple polls. Hopefully you can participate in that as well. And looking forward to hearing from established author and best-selling researcher in this space. So take it away, Bob.
Thanks, Stephen. It's great to be here with all of you. And thanks to Steve and Dion Leadership for having me. We're excited about our partnership, which I'll talk about a little bit at the end. But today, I'm going to talk about the changing workplace and why we need very different kinds of leaders at all levels of our organizations across 3 different sectors, across industries, across country cultures. And what made us successful up to this point won't get us to the next level of fulfillment and performance. And this is really based on years of research that we've done on leadership over the last 30 years. The first big question, trying to get the slide to go. Why is that slide not going? There we go. One second. So if you were 30,000 feet above the world, you would be asking the question, how do you and your organization survive and thrive in an uncertain and disruptive world? I'm reminded of a 2023 PwC survey where they surveyed 4,000 CEOs in 105 countries, and they found that 40% of the CEOs said they will no longer be economically viable if they continued on the same course that they're going today. What we find at 20,000 feet is a set of disruptors that are affecting all of us. The first is speed. The pace of life is escalating. So the question for each of you is, how do you keep up while maintaining an ability to balance our lives and bounce back from adversity? Uncertainty is reality. The world is constantly changing, making stability an illusion. So how do you move forward while managing all the unpredictability in your work and your life? Doing business is more complex, and so complexity is a new disruptor. More choices in the world. So how do you define and prioritize your work in the face of all this complexity? Technology obviously is a major disruptor, and increasingly public scrutiny and distrust is fueled by 24/7 social media, whether it's AI or the Internet of Things or big data. How do we stay open and at the same time protect ourselves from arrows coming from outside our organizations? Competition is everywhere. It's more fierce than ever. So how do you maintain a healthy bottom line, yet at the same time pursue a higher purpose and a vision? And then lastly is globalization. Markets, money, people, customers, they're all connected. So how do we succeed individually at the same time that we're creating a sustainable planet? Now, if we go 10,000 feet, we begin to see that there are a variety of unique challenges that are facing us. First of all, the pandemic took an unprecedented toll on our leaders. And people came back to the workplace as fundamentally different people. We've got 2 wars going on in the world with a lot of geopolitical uncertainty. We've got chronic inflation. I noticed that inflation is a little down this quarter, which is a good thing. Political partnership is entering our companies, where 50% of our population has a fundamentally different mental model about what a healthy society should be from the other 50%. Diminishing trust has been going on for 15 years with cynicism at an all-time high. Leaders all across the board are trying to figure out, how do we do this remote and hybrid work in a sustainable way? And obviously, there's the whole issue of climate change. So first poll is, I'd like to ask, what is the level of uncertainty and disruption in your life? 1 is extremely high and 5 is very low. So can we have the first poll? Give you 30 seconds to fill that out real quick.
Results are coming in here.
Good. So basically, we're maybe at a 3 or a 4 in terms of high or somewhat high. The real challenge is, are we living in a world of complacency and not moving fast enough? Or are we moving too fast? And we'll get into this a little later when we talk about too much, too little, and just the right amount of anxiety. Let's go back to my slides, if I will. Can we do that?
So we saw somewhat high, I guess, was the highest score there. It'd be interesting to see how this would have, where people would have been a year or 2 ago in this pandemic as well. I think we're kind of coming off the circle of that, but it's still higher than I think what we want to have healthy organizational cultures.
No question. And we also know that uncertainty is reality and stability is an illusion. So in a sense, we're all living in the midst of uncertainty. The question is, how well are we leading people through that uncertainty? Do you take this slide off or, okay, I do. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what we know. One of the things we know is that high performance organizations, whether you measure them by revenue, growth, profitability, market share, customer sat, or whatever, place greater emphasis on a holistic approach to talent development. And why do we know that? Because those healthier, high performance organizations have higher engagement, they have a healthier workforce, there's more talent retention, there's more workforce productivity. And in fact, McKinsey has done a study that said that healthy organizations with healthy leaders produce 3 times the shareholder value than other companies that are not healthy. So we have a lot of research now that says that a holistic approach to talent development is really the way to go. And so what I'm going to do today is to drill down and talk about what that actually means. So one of the things that we're facing is that we're operating like trees in a windstorm. And when you imagine a tree in a windstorm, the trunk of the tree and the roots hold the tree in place, yet the leaves and the branches are blowing all over in the wind. So let's apply that to individuals. First off is that in the trees is what we see. It's our presentations, it's our accomplishments, it's our behavior, it's what we actually do. But our roots hold us in place. Those are our values, our character, our consciousness, our awareness, our sense of self. But we operate in an old paradigm that says that what you do defines who you are. But these new companies that are investing in a holistic approach to talent development have flipped the paradigm upside down and said that who you are as a human being drives what you do. And we need to spend much more attention on the who you are piece of leadership development. There are 2 aspects of this that I'd like to talk about. The first is being grounded. And grounded is the foundation which helps leaders stay centered and resilient in the face of change. Just like that tree, the winds aren't going away, the winds of change. But we have to give people much stronger skills to stay sturdy and grounded and rooted in the face of all this change. One of the things that we're finding is levels of stress and overwhelm and burnout is at an all-time high. And in fact, when you look at all those changes, there's 2 sort of forces that I see happening inside the hearts and minds of people. The first one is that there is much greater anger, resentment, mistrust, and cynicism than we've seen in a long time. And I've been in this field for close to 40 years. And that data is pretty significant. I think the second thing we're finding is that there is a systemic feeling of anxiety in the workplace with more stress and more burnout than there's been in a long time. So how do we help our leaders grapple with this? And grounded is one way to do that. There are 6 dimensions of being grounded. Now, you've probably seen models of well-being out there. We were one of the first to put it out there in 2014. And we found that there were 6 dimensions of health that are particularly relevant. I remember showing this model to Alan Mulally, who was the CEO of Ford Motor Company years ago, and he jumped out of his computer. I jumped out of his chair, went to his computer, and pulled out a little diagram that said, "One life, life's work." And he says, "This is exactly how I live my life. This is the first thing I do, and the most important thing I have to do is to take care of myself." So let's drill down a little bit into each of these. The first one is physical health, which is how you live. And this helps us with speed. How aware are you of the connection between your mind and body? Are you managing your energy properly, both in managing stress and revitalizing yourself after a long day's work? And are you living a peak performance lifestyle? I was the global coach for Dennis Nally, who ran PwC globally. And I was always struck by the three legs of his stool: his personal life, his family life, and his work life. And he had strategies for managing all three. Every 6 weeks, he took some time off, but he really understood the connection between how you live your physical health and the speed at which he worked. The second is emotional health. And this is really how we feel. And this deals with the issue of uncertainty. We need people who are much more self-aware, who are living positive emotions. You see, we're on a continuum from our more difficult emotions like grief and loss and anger and anxiety, and our more positive ones, which are hope and generosity and gratitude and faith and indeed love. And that the best leaders live primarily in their positive emotions. And when they are having difficult times, they course correct quickly from their difficult emotions to their positive emotions. And then lastly is resilience. I remember I was in London giving at a conference, and I was having a conversation with this lovely guy from Uruguay. And in the middle of the conversation during a lunch break, the person in the front of the room introduced the lunchtime speaker. And the fellow that I was talking to got up and went to the front of the room, and it was Nando Parato. Now, you may be familiar with Nando. He was the young rugby player whose team flew over the Andes and the plane fell down. It was the source of the book Alive. And he became a serial entrepreneur. But when you talk to him about change, there were four lessons that he learned about managing his emotional health. One was, don't be afraid. So how can we help people not be afraid and be courageous? Secondly is live in the moment. Don't get hijacked by the past or the future. The third one was follow your heart. How can we cultivate more heart-based leadership in our organizations? And lastly is never stop changing. This is the story of Nando and the importance of emotional health. Intellectual health is how we deal with complexity, which is how you think. It starts with deep curiosity. People who are proficient at developing an adaptive mindset, and people who think in both and thinking versus either or. And there's been a lot of discussion about that when we talk about growth mindset versus fixed mindset and the like. There's a picture of Jürgen Knoopstorp. I interviewed him in New York. He entered Lego as the executive chairman and CEO, and the company was languishing in the marketplace, and he needed to turn the complexity of his business into innovation. So he hired some anthropologists, and they went out, and guess what they did? They observed kids, and they noticed how kids were playing with this product, the blocks. And he found that these kids evaluated problems from all angles. There was no single answer. They were creating multiple hypotheses. And so he took some of this thinking about innovation and intellectual health back to his company, and he was able to innovate the business and create a true learning organization. So I ask you, how much of this is built into your leadership development? The next one is social health. And this starts with people who are deeply authentic. You know, one of the things that's interesting post-pandemic is that people are coming to the workplace with a much greater desire for intimacy and connection. But many of our leaders lack the social and emotional skills in a fast-paced environment to give that authenticity to them. So how are they building mutually rewarding relationships and creating nourishing teams? I'm reminded of the story of Angela Ahrendts, who was the CEO of Burberry in London, and then she went to Apple, one of the most technologically sophisticated companies. But her whole approach to leadership was on human relationships. She started her day meditating every morning. She knew that her attitude had to be critical. She really used the power of smiles to engender positive emotions in the workplace, and she was self-aware and committed to her own development. I think this social health is going to become increasingly important, particularly as we're going to redefine our relationships integrating human beings and digital machines. There's a new kind of relationship that will be developed, and we need to educate people about how to integrate both of these things. The next one is vocational health, which is how you perform. And obviously, this is how we deal with increasing competition. It starts with a meaningful calling, tapping into your higher purpose, learning all the time, and committing to your own personal mastery, and then a drive to succeed. Indra is a great story. She started her world in India, where her mother told she and her sister that they could be anything that they want to be. And she taught them about how to tap into their meaningful calling. She came to the United States, and her first job was as a secretary. She then paid for herself going to Yale Management School, moved up in PepsiCo, and eventually became the chairwoman and CEO, and probably the highest ranking woman in business. She mastered vocational health, and I think this is a new kid on the block in terms of trying to develop leadership capabilities in vocational health. And I think we've added to this list financial literacy. It's becoming increasingly important for people to be financially literate, not only in their own lives, but in how the company makes money, because a lot of people don't understand where they fit in the overall organization. And lastly is the area of spiritual health. This is expressed differently around the world. In the United States, is primarily through believing in a religion. I think some 78% of Americans believe in God. You don't have to be, certainly, to be spiritual. The Latin Americans do it through the relationship to the Catholic Church. The Europeans do it with their investments in government and in philanthropy, and the Asians do it as just a part of their life. But one of the things that's happening in leadership development is there is a merging of models from the West, where we focus on goals and aspirations and positive thinking, and models from the East, where they focus on uncertainty management and detachment and connectedness. And so in the future, we're going to see an integration of Eastern and Western models. Do you have a higher purpose? Are you connected to something bigger than yourself? Ultimately, that is the mindset that enables us to leverage and make the best use of diversity. And then finally, do you have a generosity of spirit and a sense of gratitude? So there you have the 6 dimensions and the 18 roots that make up a grounded leader. Who you are drives what you do. Now, this is a holistic and integrated model, much like the human body, where the respiratory system is affected to the cardiovascular system, which is affected to the skeletal system. And all of these are important, but we're not going to be great at all of them. I know when I write a book, my physical health down, I stopped going to the gym, I stopped meditating, when in fact I'm writing a new book now, which I'll talk about in a second, and I'm going to the gym every day. In fact, you might not know, but exercise every day is the most important thing that you can do as a biomarker to prevent cardiovascular disease, cancer, Alzheimer and neurodegenerative diseases, and metabolic diseases like diabetes. So those are the 6 dimensions.
Hey, Bob, before we get into actually, you might be covering it. It's the next question. I had a comment brought to me and a question. One is that appreciated the holisticness of this model and how practical it is to understand this, but the question was around, do all these things belong in the workplace versus a life skill? And then the second question was, how did you identify through your research that these are the right 6 items to be a grounded leader?
Right. Well, we monitor the literature all the time, and we also went out and interviewed leaders to see what was most important. There are 2 things that are happening in our models of leadership development. The first one is there is very little separation anymore between personal development and professional development. We are the same person when we come to work, and our organizations need to treat us that way and to interact with us as holistic human beings. That's the first trend. The second trend is the East and West connection that I talked about, and also that our psychological sciences are interacting with our spiritual sciences, and so they're coming together. So there are these trends that are really forcing us to look at people in a much more holistic way. I hope that helps.
Yeah,
If you're looking at research and you're a quantitative person, we have a 360 called the Healthy Leader Profile, and we've given it out to thousands of people across levels and industries inside organizations. And we found, and we looked at how they, as well as their bosses, peers, and subordinates, rate them on the 6 dimensions of health, as well as performance indices, business performance indices. And what we find is that all 6 of these dimensions are correlated in a positive way with performance in a statistically significant way. One of the interesting things about this is that our spiritual health is the greatest predictor of job performance. Do you have a higher of leaders? Do they have a higher purpose? Are they connected to something bigger than themselves? And probably the most important is, are they generous? And do they have a sense of gratitude? That says something about a human being. And people want to work for that kind of person. So from the research, you find this. So let's do a quick poll. About which grounded dimension do you need the most improvement on? Can we have that second poll, please? Okay, we have 30 seconds. Which one do you think?
Results are starting to come in.
So this is pretty typical. People say mostly their physical health, and that's probably true. It's probably the most important thing that we can do, and it's the first thing that goes when we're in overwhelm and feeling burned out. But it is the most important predictor of healthy high performance. But mainly for your health.
We got physical health at 57. For those of you who can't see the screen, emotional health at 23%, and then a little bit on the social and spiritual.
Right. And if you notice that intellectual health and vocational health are down below, but I think this is an area where we need to focus on, because the world is becoming very complex. And we have to think carefully about what kinds of minds are going to be required to deal with all the choices and complexity in the world. And there are different levels of capability that we need, as well as vocational health.
Well, I would say too, hopefully as you're listening in on this, you can see the power of just labeling these 6 items as pieces of your mindset, your daily practices, your skill sets that you may not bring into a leadership context. As we teach leaders these items, it opens up a whole host of curious ways for them to think differently about how they approach their day and their week to be more effective. And again, this holistic approach is thinking this as a leadership competency in an organization. If I have to be better at giving feedback or holding people accountable, these are the bigger items that end up enabling all of those other leadership behaviors to take hold in an organization.
Yeah, I think the key word there is enabling. And this is a piece that we've been missing in our leadership development efforts. And the other thing is people love this stuff because it talks to them as a human being. They don't come to work as a purple intellectual health or a blue spiritual health. They come as a holistic person, and they're grappling with all of these at the same time. Let me move to the next slide.
Like the pull off to get there.
Yeah, if you take the poll off, I can. Why is that not going? Well, why it's not moving? There we go.
There you go.
So if grounded is the foundation, conscious leadership is the accelerant. So let's talk a little bit about why conscious leadership is so important. Nothing is more important than understanding ourselves, understanding each other, and understanding our surroundings. Many of us grew up in a paradigm that said the goal was to be the smartest kid in the world, in the room. However, being smart is now table stakes. Conscious is the new competitive advantage, and it is different from smart. And the more conscious people, the more self-aware people adapt faster and they perform better. So let's talk a little bit about this. If we had an icon where you just rated yourself up in terms of whether you think you are conscious, most people think they're conscious and self-aware, but research has shown that only about 10 to 15% of people have this ability. And another interesting statistic is that 88% of our brain tissue is unconscious and controls 96 to 98% of our perceptions and actions. So just imagine if we could increase the consciousness, the overall awareness of each person by 2 or 3 percentage points, the ROI would be amazing. Now you say, well, is that the job of a company? Absolutely, because awareness, as you'll see in some of the data that we have, is related to increasing performance. Another thing is that conscious is in the eyes of the beholder. Here we have data that we did with the Harris poll, where 94% of executives say that they are conscious. But when you ask their employees, they only say that 60% of leaders are conscious. So we carry lots of blind spots about how aware we are of other people. I'll give you 2 quick examples. The first is Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix. On multiple occasions, he had some personal ahas that affected his business. One in particular is when he took off the market the mail discs that we got in our homes and went digital too quickly. He got up on television, he admitted his mistakes, and he moved on. He was conscious and aware. Now compare that to the leaders at Wells Fargo. And I hope I'm not offending anybody from Wells Fargo on the call, but they're the first to talk about how leaders in that company push people to sell products that customers didn't want. And they were unable to listen to the feedback. And it had a huge impact on their reputation, their brand, their shareholder value, and their growth and engagement and turnover. So unconscious leaders affecting performance at another company. So let's talk a little bit about peel back the onion and try to understand, what does conscious mean here? Well, our research says that many of us lack enough awareness of ourselves and our environment. We're too stagnant in our progress, too small in our perspective, too shallow in our self-knowledge, and too safe in facing challenges. So what do we find when we talk to people who are really good at this? First off, they get real and embrace change when it's in front of them. They master a concept called realistic optimism. Secondly, is they go deep to experience the change, the whole range of reactions to change. Lastly, they think in possibilities, in expanding the change, and then they energize it by stepping up. So I'd like to drill down on each one of these and give you some examples. The first one is to get real. Now, there's a couple things that we have to do in changing our relationship to change. The first one is to move from clinging to stability to embracing uncertainty. We're never taught in our lives, as children, as adolescents, as adults, to thrive in uncertainty. But that is reality. Stability is an illusion. The other thing we have to change is to move from seeing change as happening to me to seeing change as happening for me. That is a very interesting shift in perspective in terms of how you view change. And thirdly is we've got to balance taking responsibility for shaping our environment with accepting this uncertainty of change. And the best leaders are able to do all of those things. The second one is to face facts. This is a real problem in our society right now. Many of us operate with biases and prejudices and assumptions, and we've got to help people understand how to evaluate facts. This is a new phenomena in our workplace. And then lastly is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. This is a critical skill. One of the things that the Japanese invented was the karaoke machine, and talk about a device that actually helps deal with public embarrassment. Well, we need to learn that skill in the workplace of the future. Second thing is to go deep. We have to know how to manage our threat response. We are constantly threatened by things that come at us, but we have to be able to be resilient and to manage these threats, right? Falling down and getting up, making mistakes. Do you see vulnerability as a weakness or a strength? I mean, Brene Brown started this conversation, and now we need to continue it by teaching people how to be vulnerable and even to talk about being vulnerable with other people. Oprah Winfrey is one of the great positive thinkers who teaches us a lot about letting go of baggage. I'm in the middle of writing a new book called Detach, and the book is about the 10 attachments that create havoc in our lives and how we can overcome them. Things like the attachment to stability, to the past, to the future, the attachment to control, to perfection, to success. You know what your attachments are, and we need to help people get clear about that. And then lastly is we need to help people identify problems that they have in thinking. To what extent do we generalize things that are unique? How do we magnify problems? How often do we use the word should when in fact we should be much more open to change? So we need to go deeper in terms of understanding ourselves. One of the things about going deeper is leveraging our accelerators. We each have them. And each of us has accelerators: confidence, courage, drive, faith. We're all different. But the question is, what are your accelerators that drive you forward? And then lastly, what are your hijackers? Because we need to know what we're likely to trip up over. And if we had more time, we could go and assess our accelerators and hijackers and really have discussions about the impact that has on our leadership and performance. Michael Phelps is a great example. You know, he started at age 11. He went to the Sydney Games and the Athens Games. And in Beijing, you remember he won 8 gold medals. He was at the top of his game. But then his life fell apart. He got into drugs and alcohol, difficult family relationships with his dad, and he actually checked himself into the Meadows treatment facility. And he came to realize that the fixation on being special and perfection really hurt his success. Now, he obviously has to work like a dog and strive for perfection to do what he did. However, perfection in a sport is different from perfection in life because we are all fundamentally imperfect human beings. So what you saw in Rio was a different guy. He was family oriented. He was upbeat. He was positive. You saw the impact of him looking at his hijackers and moving forward. Thinking big is another aspect of this. The first thing is to be your own drone, to get above yourself. Psychologists call this sense making or participative observation. It's being able to look at yourself in real time to see how you are interacting with others and ask yourself, what stuff is my stuff and what stuff is their stuff? Secondly, is to develop a Google mind, a mind that is constantly learning. And we know that is probably learning agility is one of the most important skills in the workplace of the future. And then lastly is to leverage your personal ecosystem. What's your leadership brand? How are you interacting with others? What are your digital and human relationships that you're cultivating as a leader? And then finally, it's about stepping up. Stepping up is first and foremost about learning to live with just enough anxiety. Anxiety can be a positive force in our life, but too little anxiety is the face of complacency. Too much anxiety is the face of chaos, and just the right amount of anxiety is what gives us our positive energy. We also have to lead with constructive impatience. I like these two examples. Jeff Bezos starts on the continuum of impatience, and his leadership development has learned to be more constructive. Angela Merkel, the head of Germany, started in a much more constructive way. But if you look at her leadership development, she moved toward a position of impatience. The combination is what really creates the most value. And then lastly, just look at the World Series. Every year we see baseball teams that emerge where they feel like a team and they operate, and you wonder, why can't we bring that spirit of shared consciousness into our workplace? Well, we've got to nurture it. And that's really an important capability. So there you have this path to conscious, from shallow, narrow, safe, and small, to going deep, thinking big, getting real, and stepping up. This can be taught. We teach this, and it is amazing the ahas that people get, and it is the source of changing behavior. What does the research say? The research says that when we look at people's performance on the bottom set of activities, are they positive in their leadership actions? Do they tap a higher purpose? Are they forming better relationships? Are they seizing new opportunities, driving for performance, unleashing human energy, and forging shared direction? What we find, as reported by bosses, peers, and subordinates, is that the people who have high self-awareness, which are the orange, outperform people who have low self-awareness. So both in terms of grounded and conscious is that we now have research that both of those capabilities affect job performance. And behind all of these are behaviors that we've operationalized, so you can actually look specifically at those 6 dimensions and 18 roots and this conscious behavior and see what needs to change specifically and how to evaluate it. Lastly, let me talk to you a little bit about one client, Cigna, who has taken Grounded and Conscious quite seriously at all levels. Cigna, as you know, is a large insurance company with 75,000 employees. They came to us looking for a more holistic model for talent development. And they knew they needed to start at the top. So they created a model that basically put who you are in the middle, surrounded by their core competencies, their capabilities. And they began to teach people that who you are drives what you do, your competencies, which influences how you perform. So they started work at the senior level, and they had conversations with senior executives about the connection between their business strategy, their leadership strategy, and their culture strategy. Because we've found that executives who understand that value chain will invest much more in leadership development. So to what extent are your leaders having that conversation, recognizing that Grounded and Conscious is a critical driver? Secondly is, what do you do with middle managers? Well, they engaged in facilitated workshop with inside and outside facilitators. They certified a bunch of their people, and they taught them how to be grounded and conscious. And they had independent seminars and workshops, and they also hooked Grounded and Conscious to other kinds of leadership development. And then lastly is, what do we do with the masses? Because Grounded and Conscious is relevant to everybody. And we do that through digital engagement, through a healthy leader portal and the like. So we are really excited about our partnership with DM Leadership, bringing Grounded and Conscious, and Steve may mention this, to other organizations. So I welcome a chat, questions and answers, and I really appreciate your attention on this.
Awesome stuff, Bob. Thank you so much. And for those of you that are on here and have attended our different workshops, I hopefully you can see why I thought this is really helpful and important information. Bob is a deep thinker in this space. His books have been on New York bestseller lists. And one of the things that we particularly appreciate within our community is that this creates ways to scale things that you can do with individual leadership coaching. And a lot of these topics you can see are really coaching topics, but those can be challenging to scale in an organization. So I appreciated the previous slide you shared, Bob, with kind of how you can bring this into an organization to be systemic, because a big part of what we're trying to accomplish is to create culture change in an organization through these leadership development applications and programs. So one of the things that we're finding as a jumping off point for organizations, and I appreciate if anybody want to put some questions in the chat to us too about your thoughts and reactions too. But what we're seeing as these are coming in here, let me just share that we have a one-day Grounded and Conscious program that's well suited for middle and senior leaders to begin this awareness building of those 6 elements up front about how someone can be a little bit more grounded in their day-to-day work and style, and making it not so esoteric, I guess I would say. There's a lot of stress management type training classes out there that talk about mindfulness and resilience, but for a lot of leaders in organizations, I find that they need something a little bit more practical. So we've appreciated that particular model. And then the second part is then on being conscious is each of those 4 items is the change management elements about how to make it sticky for somebody. And those items together start to create internally, especially for an intact work team, being able to do this where they can see it with each other at a management team level to start to spot where we're not healthy in organizations.
Steve, one of the things is that when you're in the middle of an organization, one of your principal concerns is managing risk, and particularly personal risk and business risk. That what you bring into the organization is going to be embraced by top management. Nothing's worse than bringing something in and somebody doesn't like it above you. What we find is that most of the leaders who see this stuff love it. They already think this way, and there's going to be a handful of people who think it's too soft. But the reality is most of them love it. And the people who think it's too soft need it the most.
You know, I'm going to put in the chat too the webpage we created that if somebody wants more information about each of these two models, we are going to send out the recording replay, but I had a couple of comments about the slides and materials. In there, it shows each of the two models as kind of the base item with this. And then we'll also be sending you Bob's, one of his white papers on Grounded and Conscious, a new leadership imperative as well. And we'll put that in the email for you too. But a couple other questions then, Bob. So how have you found this change by industry, particularly comment on healthcare industry as a very hair on fire, 24/7 place. So is there any research or information about how this might work in different industries?
Well, one of our largest clients is MedStar Health that we've been working in for a good 18 years. I coach the CEO and their 35,000 member healthcare system. And as you know, one of the principal problems in healthcare right now is the pace of change and burnout. Burnout among physicians, burnout among nurses, burnout among the administrative staff. And healthcare organizations are trying to figure out how to deal with this. They also have a real problem with retention. They lose good people, whether it's docs or nurses or whatever. So we educated the top 10 in that company, the top 200, and then we brought the education to the top 4,000 leaders, all around Grounded and Conscious and their capabilities, their competencies at MedStar. So I think that's a ripe industry right now. They're really bleeding, they're hurting. Technology is fundamentally changing that industry. But in a broader sense, we found that this is relevant in finance and insurance companies. It's also relevant in manufacturing companies. We've done work at Ford and at Huntington Ingalls, where they make the aircraft carriers and submarines. And so I think it's just human. It's human. One of the things that we are entering is a humanity revolution, where there are these deep psychological shifts, and there's a desire for a healthier workplace.
Well, there are a lot of manufacturing companies on the line here as well, and I know we work with a lot of them, and many of the HR leaders we work with would say we are not conscious. We're going from meeting to meeting, reacting to the fire of the day, and
Right.
not making healthy decisions for business decisions, for people, for themselves. And that cycle is just, it's hard to stop. So, how do you move from that place where you're just like, every day is just running on this treadmill and reacting, to integrating these concepts and processes?
Well, it's a problem in our society because we're a very action-oriented society, and we penalize introspection and self-awareness and stopping to take a breath. But this is a very important time because the quality of the decisions that we make will have a huge impact on the future performance of the business. And so we have to teach people how to stop and take a breath and see the forest from the trees. And we just have found at Healthy Companies that people really value enabling them to stop and have a conversation like this. And they come out of it refreshed and refurbished. So I think some of it is our own fear that this may not be relevant to the business requirements of our time, but I think companies are ready for this. They weren't ready for this 10 years ago or 5 years ago, but they're ready now because everybody came out of the pandemic a little different.
I feel the same way. And I think with all the organizations we work with, there are certain things that 5 years ago, organizations, even though they may have needed it, were just not ready to talk about bringing their own self to the workplace. And it's really changed a lot. And that's why I know I'm really grateful to be able to have this content to bring into the clients that we work with here at Dion Leadership. And I'm really excited. I hope the folks on this call here got some good insights for items that you could do and bring. I wanted Bob's 2 books. Well, there's multiple books, but there's a grounded book, there's a conscious book. That would be a great way for you as an organization to just say, you know, if you're not sure or can't get a commitment to a training class or something, maybe this replay for a senior leader might be helpful. Show the snippet of a model. You know, if somebody's a book reader on an airplane, give them one of these books. But our goal here was to help motivate you to realize how important it is to not just teach the basic leadership and management skills, but some of these advanced skills that end up making those basic skills actually come to life in an organization. And it really starts with a leader holistically being a grounded person and showing up every day in a conscious way. And I think this is a practical way that we can do that within our communities. So thanks again, Bob, for joining us today. Thanks everybody for attending. Please look for our next webinar invite. Our next one will not be until January, and it will be a panel with every year we've been doing on the kickoff a year of kind of the state of HR and talent management, and we'll be inviting 3 CHRO level folks from 3 different organizations to come talk about what they saw last year and what they're doing next year. Or well, by that point, it'll be for 2024 and help kind of start the new year out right. So thanks for being part of our community. Feel free to reach out to us if you want to talk a little bit further about this. And thanks again for your time today.